Welcome to NRL Offside for another bumper edition. Johnny, what a weekend of football, mate. It was absolutely fantastic over the Easter weekend. We have plenty to discuss. We do have to start with something. Now, last week in your introductory comments, you were pretty happy about a couple of things. The first one was the Roosters beating Manly. The second one is that Italy was still alive in World Cup qualifying. So when we talked about it, I think Italy had one game to go, and that was going to be the game that was going to lead them into the World Cup for the first time in the last 3 World Cups. Now, mate, over the first month or so of this show, we've had a few takes that have aged badly. That one aged badly quickly. Before we'd even posted the show that afternoon, we actually found out that Italy had been beaten by Bosnia-Herzegovina and hadn't qualified for the World Cup. First and foremost, mate, a World Cup without Italy, it just doesn't feel right. A couple of weekends ago, I went to see the Wu-Tang Clan and Method Man didn't turn up. And it's a little bit the same. It just feels like something is amiss. Mate, the second thing is a welfare check. You're obviously a very dear friend of mine. Mate, how are you? Are you okay in the wake of Italy missing yet another Soccer World Cup?
All right. Well, good day, Noz, and hello, listeners. Look, let's start with hope everyone had a great Easter long weekend. Italy, I was really hoping you weren't going to bring that up. As you said, that's actually 3 World Cups in a row that Italy have not qualified. I won't swear because I tell you what, it's damn super embarrassing. But anyway, there's nothing we can do about that now. Time to move on and let's talk NRL. So let's get stuck into it, Noz.
Mate, that's good life philosophy. Only worry about the things that you can control. I wish I'd follow that same philosophy with Parramatta. Now, mate, in terms of this episode, we've got plenty to talk about. I mentioned the fact that it was a bumper weekend of football, and there was certainly a lot happening across the park. Now, in terms of what we're going to chat about today, what caught our eye is not so much what is catching our eye, rather than what's widening our eyes in admiration, in horror if you're a supporter of other teams. We also have a somber but important topic for the grapple. And mate, freeballing, we're trying something a little bit different this week. I have no idea what you're talking about within freeballing, so I'm going to sort of react in live time. I'm really looking forward to that. So that's a little bit later on in the program. Now, mate, on to speed rounds. We have now been doing speed round for about 4 weeks, and I think over that period of time we've had as many recalibrations. So we're going to have another recalibration. The catalyst for this is that we do have an avid listener who is keeping tabs on the length of time that we take. Now, this is a person I actually work with. They're a little bit OCD and they're sort of known for this type of thing, but they are actually following each week, assiduously timing us. And we've worked out that our average is between 4.5 and 5 minutes. Now, there's not much point having an upbeat theme song if we're going to be sluggish. So we've added a little bit more structure this week, mate. We are middle-aged men. We like structure. And it's going to be a little bit like haiku poetry. What we're actually after with speed round this week is we're after beauty and transcendence through constraint. So, mate, I want you to bear that in mind. I'm going to bear that in mind as well. The irony being that I've just spent 3 minutes talking about constraint. So maybe it's time for us to actually get on to speed round. So, mate, enough talking. We shall kick off with our upbeat jingle and our title card and then get into it.
Bring it on, Noz. Dolphins versus Seagulls. Change the coach, change the fortunes. That's exactly what Manly did under first game coach Kieran Foran. Mate, at one stage they led 52-0. I really didn't see that, to be honest. Ola Kawatu was an absolute wrecking ball down that right edge, and Turbo, well, he was on as well. As for the Dolphins, look, their defence was woeful. To leak that many points at home was seriously embarrassing. Mate, they've got a lot of work to do. Moving to the Rabbitohs versus the Bulldogs, that was an entertaining Easter Friday clash. South came out of the blocks really fast, but the Dogs did well to work their way back actually into it. Actually, at half time, they actually led at the break. But after that, it all unravelled for the Dogs. Poor discipline, penalties, errors, and then they lost Critter to injury, which really further compounded their pretty disjointed attack, to be honest. And South, look, through their key men, they just capitalised when it mattered and got the chocolates in the end. Moving to the Panthers versus the Storm. Look, I'm honestly running out of words to describe Penrith at the moment. They went to another level again. Look, everyone's in sync at the moment. Everyone's executing. It's seriously impressive to watch. As for Melbourne, they weren't even that bad, to be honest, but they still had 50 points put on them, which sort of tells you exactly where Penrith are right now. Dragons versus the Cowboys. The Dragons did not score a single point when the Cowboys went down a man after Cotter was sin bin and finished up after 80 minutes without even troubling the scoreboard. And at home, that's really rock bottom for the Dragons. They had chances, which makes it even worse. For the Cows, Drinkwater and Dearden really carved up. That's 3 straight wins in a row now for the Cows. And I reckon Toddy Payton's probably breathing a lot easier these days. As for Flanagan, look, at this rate, it's hard to see him really lasting the season.
Okay, Titans, Broncos. Now, I was trying to think of a catchy name for this clash here, JC. The Southeast Queensland Skirmish, the Coomera Connector Clash, the M1 Roadworks Rumble. Mate, whatever the name, it was a frenetic encounter between the Titans and the Broncos at the Seabus Stadium on Saturday night. However, it was the sheer horsepower of Walsh, Haas, Mann, Staggs, Shibasaki and crew, which actually lifted Brisbane to a pretty convincing win over a Gold Coast team that's capable of short bursts of acceleration, but all too often lacks the handling to stay on track. Sharks Warriors was a game that had the potential to make any self-respecting tipster's head explode, but it ended up being surprisingly conventional. The Sharks finally showed some tenacity, taking the early blows of this Warriors team and then delivering more of their own to take the win at Ocean Protect. Cronulla now have a couple of consecutive wins under their belts, while New Zealand have come back to the pack after their strong start. Knights Raiders. This was a classic clash of teams heading in different directions, both on the table and in terms of headspace. And that's the way it pretty much played out. A vibrant Newcastle team just played over the top of a Raiders outfit that's sinking under the weight of its own distemper. The Knights' dynamic duo of Marju and Young each bagged the double, while Fletcher Sharp and Sandon Smith ran off the back of a strong forward display to bamboozle a Canberra side that needs to turn their season around while they still have one. Tigers, Eels. What to say about this game, Johnny? It was suitably epic. So epic that I half expected it to be decided by a chariot race rather than a penalty goal. The Tigers showed their potency with 3 quick-fire tries before the half, but Para showed some hitherto undisclosed tenacity by edging their way back into the game with defensive resolve, despite being light on troops. The game ended somewhat bizarrely on 3 penalty kicks, 1 for each team, and then Jock Madden's game winner in extra time. And Tigers are now sitting in second place. However, it may well have been Parramatta who found their missing ingredient. They exhibited a defensive resolve that to this point has been MIA. Okay, we weren't too bad on that one, Johnny. I'm just sort of looking at the stopwatch. I think we probably did that in about 3.5 minutes. We'll have to go to our listener. She'll no doubt be doing a check, and we'll be getting a bit of an idea of that on Thursday morning. Now, in terms of what caught your eye, Johnny?
Look, it's hard to go past Penrith right now. They're catching everyone's eye, to be honest. But there's one player in that side that's really standing out to me, and that's that young kid, Casey McLean. The guy's just 19 and already looks like a superstar in the making. He just keeps improving. He's quick, he's strong, he defends well, and nothing seems to faze him. I keep thinking back to the game last year against the Dogs when Critter went straight at him, trying to rattle a young kid. Mate, the guy showed no nerves, didn't take a backward step, and if anything, he actually came out on top. He actually reminds me of a young Laurie Daly coming through at the Raiders many years ago, that sort of natural confidence, aggressive presence. And as you know, with the new origin eligibility rules, I reckon he could jag a starting spot, especially now with Critter likely to be out. So I'm really looking forward to watching the rise of this young kid, Casey McLean.
Mate, I've got a slightly different tact when it comes to chatting about Penrith. And my question is, why are they so good? I don't know if you watched the Fox broadcast on Good Friday, but at halftime, Luke Keary posed that very question to Michael Ennis. And Ennis said a couple of things that were interesting. He said they're incredibly fit.
Agreed.
So they said they seem to be fitter than everybody else. He also said that everybody knows their role. So you come into the Penrith system and everybody knows exactly what they have to do. And as part of that, Ivan Cleary just has this fantastic ability as a coach to really get the best out of his players. Now, I think that's the start of the answer. A big part of their on-field success is obviously their impeccable execution. But I think there's another secret with Penrith, Johnny, and that is something which is almost counterintuitive, and that's their roster turnover. What we typically see with the elite teams is they get hollowed out as other teams come and sort of take their talent away. It's particularly acute in the situation where we have a salary cap. Now, if you look at all the players that Penrith have lost over the last 5 years, they've almost lost an origin side of talent. I mean, you think about people like Capewell, Kickow, Crichton, Burton, Turova, Kurosawa, Luai, Fisher-Harris. I've probably missed a few in that grouping as well. But I think that has actually played into Penrith's hands in a lot of ways. The NRL, rugby league in general, it's a brutal contact sport, and it operates on probably 3 to 5 year cycles. For us as spectators, particularly as you get older, sort of time passes without really registering, but players wear out, and they wear out a lot more quickly than we think, especially in the forward. So I think that roster turnover has actually benefited Penrith. Now, that's been combined with savvy player recruitment. They've done a fantastic job blooding juniors. So they've not only brought talented juniors up into their program, they put them into the system, they coached them properly. They've also done a fantastic job in terms of buying low and distressed assets. So if you think about Isaiah Papali'i, if you think about Luke Garner, they're blokes that sort of had outworn their welcome at other clubs or hadn't really hit their stride, and they've come into that system. Cleary's actually fine-tuned them, and now they're making a great contribution. And what it's actually done is it has meant that the team hasn't been hollowed out. They're running on fresh legs. They can use their salary cap wisely. And the example I actually have of this is Luke Capewell. Now, Capewell's a great footballer. He was a premiership player at Penrith. He then went on to Brisbane and almost helped them win a premiership a few years later. A lot of clubs would have thrown the kitchen sink at Kurt Capewell and tried to keep him, and they would have kept him 2 years too long. Penrith just cut ties. They keep the salary cap for the fresh up-and-comers, keeping those fresh legs in their system. Now, I think the biggest litmus test of this is going to be Nathan Cleary. So there are rumours swirling around the game that Cleary is going to go to Europe after his contract runs out in 2027. He has been the linchpin of that team. If Cleary goes and they keep this elite role going, then, mate, we are witnessing something historically significant.
Yeah, no, well said, Noz.
Okay, now, John, onto the grapple. Now, this week's grapple is a little bit somber. Last week, we actually heard that Nathan Merritt, the former South Sydney winger, has been diagnosed with terminal cancer. And I mean, first and foremost, our hearts actually go out to Nathan and his family. Now, a few things about Nathan Merritt. He's from Redfern. He started playing his junior footy at Alexandria Rovers. Then he spent the bulk of his career at South Sydney. By the time he actually left South Sydney, he was the leading try scorer for the club. Merritt was in a long line of fantastic Indigenous wingers, the likes of Larry Corowa, Chicka Ferguson, Ray Blacklock, Ricky Walford, Wendell Saylor, Nathan Blacklock, Blake Ferguson, Josh Addo-Carr. And interestingly enough, the player who replaced him as South's top try scorer, before he actually went on to become the game's top try scorer, Alex Johnston. He's another great Indigenous flyer. And, mate, it's not just wingers. There's a long, illustrious history of great Indigenous players. I went back and did a little bit of research on this, and the first Indigenous player in our game was in 1909, a player by the name of George Green. So almost as soon as the competition started, we had Indigenous representation. Lionel Morgan was the first Indigenous player for Australia, so he represented in 1960. And mate, this is something that I'm particularly proud of. I mentioned the fact that Artie Beetson was a personal hero of mine, but rugby league had the first ever Indigenous captain of a national team. So Big Artie captained the Kangaroos in a test match against France in 1973. But I mean, that's just the start of it. We had Eric Sims, Steve Ella, Ronnie Gibbs, Ewan McGrady, Laurie Daly, Jock Mundine, Steve Renoff, Gordon Tallis, Matt Bowen, Sam Thaiday, Will Chambers, Greg Inglis, Jonathan Thurston, Jack Whiten, Alex Johnston, Latrell Mitchell. Mate, just from those names, you can see that they've been a really, really important part of the game. As of this podcast, 14% of the NRL identifies as being Indigenous. That number actually increases for the NRLW, where it's 17%. Now, if you consider the fact that the percentage of Indigenous people in the Australian population is 3, mate, that's really, really impressive. It's also really interesting in the context of the AFL. There was a fascinating article a few weeks ago in the Sydney Morning Herald, which was talking about the multiculturalism of the NRL compared to the AFL. The AFL is actually going backwards. Their Indigenous representation at the moment is 7%. Now, in terms of your favourite Indigenous player, JC, mate, who is it?
Look, I thought I'd go back over the decades. So if I look at the 80s, for me it was the great chip and chase specialist Scotty Gale. He was an absolute freak, mate. Rest in peace. I also loved the zip man, your man Steve Ella from the Parramatta Eels. If I look at the 90s, for me it's hard to go past Laurie Daly. The 2000s, it was JT and GI, probably two of the best. But my all-time favourite Indigenous player is actually Cliffy Lyons, and he was a magician with the ball. For me, probably one of the most naturally gifted ball players I think the game has ever seen. He made it look effortless, and as we all know, he didn't mind a little dart at half time as well. So, mate, God bless Cliffy. He was a magician.
He was also one of those blokes you never quite knew what his what his age was. I'm sure Cliffy played till he was about 47. But mate, going back to more serious topics, and relating it back to Nathan Merritt's current situation, that's in terms of Indigenous health. Some of the figures that we actually have for Indigenous health, they're quite stark. The biggest one is the life expectancy. When my sons were actually playing junior rugby league, one week they actually played against the Redfern All Blacks. At that particular time, I was doing a project on Indigenous health, and I was sort of looking at a few of the markers, and I was looking around at the Aboriginal kids, and then I was looking at our kids at Mascot, and realizing that our kids were going to live a decade longer by simple fact that they were born non-Indigenous in Australia. Now, that figure in itself is just really, really horrible. The burden of disease is 2.3 times higher in Indigenous people and non-Indigenous people. Just over half of all Indigenous people suffer from a chronic disease as well. So again, it's something that we really need to address in this country. I don't want to sound naive or simplistic about this. Indigenous health is a very complex problem. It's going to be challenging to solve, but a lot of the solutions will come through community. And when we talked about the role that Indigenous footballers play in the NRL and in rugby league, it comes through loud and clear that community is intertwined with football and vice versa. In a climate where we increasingly define ourselves by what separates us, football is something that actually unites us. And we can sort of use that as one piece of the puzzle in terms of solving this terrible, terrible problem. Now, I do have this incredible photo that I'm going to put up as well, John. It is a famed photo in the South Sydney District Rugby League. There's a copy of it hanging in the South Juniors. There's also a copy of it hanging in the gym down at Mascot Oval, and there's probably one out at La Perouse as well. To me, it's actually as important to our game as the famous Proven Summons photo. So I'll just put it up now. It really shows, again, that community that football can bring. Now, back to Nathan. He not only reminds us of the work that needs to be done, but how we all need to pull together to do it. At the end of the day, we all send our love to Nathan and his family. I'm sure that South, the NRL, and the entire rugby league community will rally around him.
Yeah, well said, Noz, and yeah, really sad to hear the health news about Nathan Merritt. Look, on the field, he was one of the greats for South. As you said, he held the highest try scoring record at one stage, and I understand by all accounts, off the field, he's generally one of the good guys of the game. To see him going through the tough times is quite tough to hear, and as you said, our thoughts are with him, his family, and all of his mates.
Yeah, well said, mate. Now, onto the round preview. So let's have a look at the upcoming round. Johnny, the Bulldogs versus the Panthers.
Look, I'm going to start with the obvious. Penrith will win. on current form, there's not much more to say, to be honest. However, it's funny how things change in 12 months. Last year, these two played a cracking game, if you remember, where the Panthers actually got up 8-6 in a real grind. It was a fantastic game. Fast forward to now, and the gap between these two sides is pretty significant. The Dogs are coming off back-to-back losses and, in my opinion, are struggling. And now with the news that Critters is going to be out for an extended period, the task just becomes even tougher. So the real question is whether Penrith can keep up that ridiculous form they're in by winning by 20 points or more, what they've been able to achieve after the first 5 rounds. So I'm thinking yes, and I'm thinking it's going to be a big win.
I have to get off the Dogs. I've been tipping them week after week, and they just are seemingly getting worse week by week. They're directionless in attack. Their defence wasn't terrible against Souths. I mean, Souths were at their opportunistic best, but made their attack. I ran into a dear old mate of mine at South Point on Sunday, and he is a massive Canterbury fan, and he was just railing about Galvin. Now, he said, mate, I do not care about the future. If you're playing first grade, the future is actually now. He said, what are we doing in attack? And it's a really, really a good question when it comes to the Bulldogs and the direction in which they're heading. Now, in terms of the future is now for the Panthers, mate. They are just cutting down teams left, right, and centres. I actually agree with you. I think the Panthers in a cakewalk.
Let's move to Dragons versus the Sea Eagles. Kieran Foran, mate, I've got him as coach of the year. Okay, maybe, maybe a slight joke, but he was definitely coach of round 5. Manly looked a completely different side from that team that lost three at home, even though they had the same players in the field as the first 3 games. Look, if Seabold was still in charge, you'd probably call this game the battle of the struggling coaches. So I'm sure that Flanagan will be keen to get one over his opposite, the rookie Foz. And I really hope last week was rock bottom for Dragon fans because it was pretty dreadful, but Manly for me.
Yeah, mate. Actually, the real story here is the Dragons. Mate, the Dragons were hopeless. Like, they were not first grade standard on Saturday night. At this point, they look to have nothing. Now, if I was in charge at the Dragons, I'll be looking to burn the joint down and restart. So there's really not much else they can do at this particular point. Manly, their tails are up. The only sort of nagging thought in my head, Johnny, can you actually trust them? Again, mentally up, down. Rebounds are great, but it does show you that your application wasn't fantastic prior to that. In saying that, I don't think you need much trust in the team to beat the Saints. I think Manly are going to do this one pretty easily.
Let's move to Broncos versus the Cowboys. These two teams have had some absolute ding-dong battles over the last few years, and I think this one here shapes up as no different. Both sides are actually in pretty good form in coming off wins. But now with the news that Benny Hunt, Reynolds, and the freak Reece Walsh are all out, I think it really levels things up. And it probably brings the Cowboys right into the match. So I can actually smell a bit of an upset here. I'm actually going to go for the Cows.
But it is a mouthwatering clash. And I agree with you. I think it's a lot closer now that the Brisbane Broncos have actually lost those players. In saying that, they still had plenty of talent across the park. So Ezra Mann's still there. Shibasaki looked like he was sort of returning to form against the Titans on Saturday night. Also, Dean Mariner. I mean, I think Dean Mariner's been a very, very underrated part of that team over the last 18 months or so. And, mate, the biggest factor that the Brisbane Broncos have is one of my favourite non-eels, and that's Katoni Staggs. So Katoni Staggs, mate, week in, week out, he just plays so hard. It's fantastic. I think the clash of the game is going to be Jackson Purdue versus Staggs, because Purdue was also fantastic in the game against the Dragons on Saturday night. I'm going the Cowboys as well, Johnny. I think it's going to be a bit of a boil over. So North Queensland for me as well.
Let's move to the Rabbitohs versus the Raiders. This game's been played in Perth, which might just level things out a touch. The Raiders, look, I don't think anyone saw them dropping, 4 games in a row, let alone Ricky Stewart. They'll be up against it here, especially against a South side that I think is actually looking pretty dangerous at the moment. Perth obviously gives them a little bit of a sniff, but as I said, I think South will get the job done. 5 straight losses for the Raiders. Ouch. That'll be tough.
Yeah, mate, a little bit like the Bulldogs. I am completely off these Raiders. I think it's time to start believing our eyes with them. Now, a couple of things as well. I think that maybe their close wins last year are catching up with them. So I've talked a few weeks ago about my belief in reversion to the mean. Maybe they are just reverting to the mean. But if that's the case, then geez, they're really doing it with a vengeance. Now, Souths on Friday, again, I mentioned this a couple of times as well. They were at their opportunistic best against the Bulldogs. Latrell was fantastic. I mean, when he's on his game, he really is one of the best that we have. And at that back row, Duncan, Murray, Fafita, I think Souths as well.
Let's move to Sharks versus the Roosters. Look, I tipped the Warriors to knock over the Sharks last week, and I got that one completely wrong. Trindle and his peachy clone fullback, he's an absolute sensation, that guy. Mate, absolutely tore the Warriors to shreds. Look, as for my Roosters, I just hope they've got a little bit of revenge on their minds, especially after that semi-final loss at Shark Park last year. I was there that night, and let me tell you, we were diabolical. And to be fair, the Sharks weren't much better, but they still sent us packing for the season. So, look, for the Chooks to win it, it's pretty simple: discipline and complete your sets. I think if the Roosters do that, there's every chance they'll get the job done down in the Shire.
Now, things about Chooks and the Roosters, mate, the games are always oddly compelling. They may not be of much consequence. I mean, over the last 3 or 4 years, both of these teams have been sort of like middling teams. They haven't really been competitive. I mean, let's be real about their premiership aspirations. I think the Sharks are improving since they got beaten by the Panthers. And in retrospect, they were the closest of the Panthers. They've just been quietly going about their business and looking quite good. They look quite good against the Warriors when they played over the weekend. Um, that said, mate, I'm looking for the Roosters to turn this game around. They've had a week off. Having a week off over Easter might be just the thing that they actually need to build on their win against Manly at Brookvale. So I'm actually going for the Roosters. I think it's going to be a really open and entertaining game, but I think your Chooks may well get the 2 points at the end of it.
Let's move to Storm versus the Warriors. Look, I've got to start with it's pretty rare to see a Storm team coming into the game off 3 straight losses, but it's actually true. Something's just not quite clicking for Melbourne this season, in my opinion. As for the Warriors, mate, has their early season form, has that bubble just burst? I think a little bit. I think it has. But I just can't see Melbourne dropping 4 on the trot. Can you just imagine what Craig Bellamy would do in the coach's box if that happens? So for me, I think the Storm will get this one over the Warriors.
Yeah, again, mate, this is going to be a fascinating encounter. At any time over the last 25 years, you'd pencil this one in as a Storm carver. The Warriors have started to dip a little bit after sort of having a good first few rounds, and this is normally a game where the Storm would come in and really put the opposition in their place. But I said this a few weeks ago, this is not our usual Storms team. I think the sort of root of the problem with Melbourne is within their forwards, and the Warriors have a really good forward pack. I'm actually going for the Warriors in this one. It is unprecedented to be contemplating, 4 straight losses for the Storm. So again, there's that. I'm thinking about that and how likely that is. But just the way that they're currently playing, I really think that the Warriors are in with the show.
Okay, that's a big call, Noz. Storm are playing
Mate,
at
I'm
home,
full of big
so
calls. That's it. Yeah.
mm. All
Stick
right,
with me, mate. You'll get all sorts of idiotic calls.
let's move to your mob. The Eels versus the Titans. Start with the Titans. They actually weren't too bad against the Broncos last start, especially for the sort of first 60 or so minutes. Para, on the other hand, look, they're struggling definitely. Obviously, got a few injuries. Their attack and defense is definitely hit and miss. And obviously, losing last week in Golden Point was pretty shattering. Even though this game's at home, I just feel like it's still a danger game for the Eels. I can definitely see maybe an upset brewing here. So, but I think I'll stick with Para, but I'm not far from convinced, to be honest.
Yeah, mate, you're probably right not to be convinced. It's going to be interesting to see who Parramatta actually field after the horrific injury toll that we suffered, not only on the Easter Monday game, but in the previous weeks. It's going to be again, a Parramatta lineup it's very much diminished. In saying that, though, I thought Parramatta were much better on Easter Monday. This might sound strange because the game itself was a bit of a gut check, and we lost in extra time. It's always terrible when you do lose golden point. But mate, our defence was much better, and that's what I was looking for. Previous weeks, I've talked about Parramatta's defence, how it was simply put, the worst defence in the competition. They were much better. They repelled the Tigers. They were down on troops, people playing out of position. The Titans, they're an enigma. They look good in patches, but they can't seem to sustain it over the entire 80 minutes. I am going Parramatta here. I'm not going with my heart, I'm going with my head. I just think that if they can show that degree of defensive resoluteness, it'll really sort of get them over the top of the Titans. Now, onto the game of the round, John. If you said this a couple of weeks ago, you probably would have thought, or someone probably would have thought you were mad, but the Tigers versus the Knights. So both teams in the upper echelons of the competition at the moment. They're also playing some pretty compelling football. So, mate, Tigers versus the Knights. Give us your lowdown.
Look, this one here has the makings of a pretty cracking game. Both sides love to play footy, especially in attack. Plenty of excitement in both sides. With a lot of their young talent. I'm also hearing that maybe Dylan Brown could be back for the Knights. I heard something yesterday, which will be a big in. But look, I think the Knights have definitely been riding a pretty big wave lately. Maybe they just come back to earth just a touch. I've actually got the Tigers in this one.
Yeah, mate, it's a tough pick. The Knights continue to impress, and a lot of that's being driven off their youth movement. So the Fletchers, Hunt and Sharp, Bradman Best. I also checked Dom Young. Dom Young's only 24 years old. Now, that in itself was a surprise. He seems to have been around for the last 5 or 6 years. And if you add Dylan Brown to that mix, Brown's only 25. So, mate, they've just got that compelling mix of enthusiasm, of young legs, and it's really come to the fore over the first month or so of the competition. Justin Holbrook's coaching we've talked about, that has just been fantastic. He has his team up every single week, and he has them playing to their strengths. Tigers, they're similar. They're probably a little less consistent than Newcastle at the moment, but they do have lots of young players with fresh legs and with creativity. So Buller, Makasini, Laulihi, Turuva, Dewey, not necessarily part of the youth movement, but he's an integral part of that team at the moment. They can get bogged down and they sometimes get a little bit lost. They did it against Souths. The second half against Parramatta on Easter Monday, they weren't necessarily moving smoothly either. The key for them is to stay focused. Now, I think it's going to be a good open encounter. Like a lot of these games, I think the key is going to be defence. Whoever can stop the opposition, prevent them from scoring, that is going to, I think, be the thing that ultimately determines who's going to win. And with that in mind, I think the Knights are just playing with a little bit more consistency at the moment. Excellent. Now, Johnny, I mentioned the fact that I have absolutely no idea what you're talking about with free balling. So, bang, kick off, mate. I'm very excited about this. What is it?
All right, Noz. So my free balling topping this week, and I reckon you're going to love it, is on the great Brett Kenny. And the point that I want to make about Brett Kenny is that I'm actually quite astonished that Brett Kenny has not ever been recognised as an immortal of the game. Now, for our younger listeners, they may not have seen too much of Brett Kenny, but for me, he's probably in the two best players of the 1980s. I've got Brett Kenny and Benny Elias as I believe the two best players of the 1980s. You can obviously throw Wally Lewis into the mix, and rightly so, and probably a Peter Sterling as well. But for mine, Brett Kenny sits right at the top of the tree. Let's have a look at Brett Kenny's resume, and it's pretty impressive. So he played 265 games for Para, 25 games for Wigan. He won 4 premierships. You remember 3 on the trot. He won a Challenge Cup at Webley in front of 100,000 spectators against his old mate Sterling. He played 17 Origins, 17 Tests. He was a Dally M Player of the Year in 1986. He picked up 2 Clive Churchills in 1982 and 83, and he won the Golden Boot in 1985. And just to top it off, he won the Lance Todd Medal, which is the medal that they give away in the UK League. And just to end, he was also the only player to score 2 tries in 3 straight grand finals. So that's a pretty impressive resume from our mate Brett Kenny. Now, positionally, in my opinion, he could do it all. He could play at centre or 5'8", but I think at 6, that was clearly his backyard. For me, he's probably the most balanced runner I've ever seen. He had silky hands, beautiful footwork. He wasn't lightning quick, but he was very deceptive. He always found space. He always created something, and his dummy, well, that was just pure class. Now, look, no disrespect to Mal Meninga. As we all know, he's an immortal and a clear champion. But I'd back that even Mal would say that Kenny was the better all-round player. And I think if he put it to the pub test in New South Wales or even Queensland, I reckon Bert, as we used to call him, would probably get a nod more often than not. I mentioned Wally Lewis before, and look, he was the king of Origin, an absolute genius, and fully deserving of his immortal status. But here's one stat that really stands out. In 12 Origins where Kenny started at 5'8" for New South Wales, he actually went 8-4 versus Lewis in their head-to-head. And I tell you what, not many people got the better of Wally on that stage, but Kenny actually did. And that's probably my point. Brett Kenny dominated at every level, club, Origin, and also at international football. The consistency, the impact, the big game moments, Brett Kenny did it all. So, look, I think the next time that they're discussing the Immortals selection, for me, Brett Kenny has to be right in the conversation. I truly believe he belongs in that club. And to those listeners, who remember rugby league in the 80s, I'd be really keen to, to hear your comments. Drop us your thoughts because, in my opinion, Brett Kenny truly deserves to be in that category. So, what do you reckon, Noz? What's your thoughts on Brett Kenny being an immortal?
I think you know my thoughts. Yeah, there's a couple of things, and I'm going to look at it from a sort of bigger picture. The great St. George teams of the 50s and 60s, I think they have 4 immortals. We obviously have Ron Coote from the Roosters, the great Roosters teams of the 70s. We've got Mal Meninga from Canberra. Like that Parramatta team of the 80s doesn't have an immortal. I think Stello's got a case, but certainly with Kenny. Now, mate, speaking of Parramatta greats, I would just like to finish today's show with a tribute to another Parramatta great, and that's Neville Glover. They did have a moment of silence for him yesterday at the Easter Monday game. Now, in terms of his football legacy, in the wake of his passing, everybody has talked about the 1976 grand final. Like it or not, his footballing legacy was defined by that one play. But when you read about his life, it was much more. So he was the sort of bloke that our game throws up. He was big-hearted. He was civic-minded, did a lot of work with charities, particularly the Men of League. And like all of us aspire to do, he actually left this place better than how he found it. So, Vale Nev, rest easy, mate. Now, I'll just encourage everybody to subscribe. So if you've enjoyed what you've listened to, guys, or watched, then just subscribe on YouTube or subscribe on your streaming platform of choice. Thank you very much again for joining us. Johnny, I'll get you to lead us out.
Yeah, so catch you next week, Noz, and have a great week, listeners, and stay well, and bye for now.